What is going on, guys? This is Miasin. So in some of my shorts, sometimes I cover really weird interactions that pretty much nobody is aware of, but I really wanted to make a full video on a bunch of these weird interactions and rulings that, again, you really have to understand because they might come up in a game and they might be disguised under something else and, of course, function with other cards that I'm the ones that I'm showing you. And you need to know why these cards interact the way they do in order to not be caught off guard and not lose unlosable games, and also sometimes win unwinnable games, which obviously works in your favor. So yeah, today I'll show you guys a bunch of these interactions, but before this video starts, I would really appreciate you if you could smash the like and subscribe button, and now let's get right into interaction number 1 out of 5. I was gonna say combo number 1 out of 5. Alright, so the first one is something that, again, I've touched on a few weeks ago. Basically, let's just say you summon a monster like Kashtira Fenrir, for example, and then your opponent attempts to negate the summon with something like Evilzor Lagia. There are other cards that function that way, you know, that can, that are not Solemn Judgment or Solemn Strike, that can negate the summon of monsters. But yeah, let's just say that your opponent negates the summon of Fenrir. You can actually use the infinite impermanence that you have in your hand in order to negate that Lagia. And the reason for that is because the Fenrir is not technically on your field. You don't really control a card on the field. The Fenrir is in limbo. I've talked about that, but it gets deeper than that, because if your opponent, let's say, uses another thing like Baron de Fleur, you can actually use the Gamma because, again, you don't have a monster. So you don't control a card on the field, you don't control a monster on the field, and furthermore, if you want to use Forbidden Droplet, you cannot send the Fenrir because it is neither in your field, neither in your hand, which is kind of funny when you think about it, but yeah, again, it's in limbo. It's like in between the field and the hand. It's kind of like in another dimension. It's hard to explain because it's impossible to explain. But also, even on the resolution of all these things, the Fenrir would have not seen anything, so it's not going to see that your opponent used the Lagia and the Baron de Fleur. And because of that, even though your opponent used several monster effects, you are not allowed to use the effect of Fenrir in order to banish a card your opponent controls. So keep that in mind in case it randomly comes up. It could, actually, because Saravis is a monster that can negate summons, and that is played in Silent Enforcer, and Fenrir is still a 3, so this interaction very much could come up. Maybe not with a Gamma, but with Imperm and Droplet, it definitely can. So yeah, keep that in mind. It's extremely confusing, and with that said, let's get into interaction number 2. Alright, so this one is actually pretty funny because I feel like a lot of pro players might not even be aware of that, and they might have to reread Forbidden Droplet because of this kind of neat interaction. I swear to God, this card has a lot of intricacies. I always keep learning new things every single day, and Forbidden Droplet, even though it looks really simple on paper, it's sometimes randomly kind of complicated, but this time it's not that it's complicated, it's just that you have to actually read the card and understand why it works that way. So in this instance, my opponent has 4 monsters on board. I have Forbidden Droplet, and there are 3 monsters that I might want to negate, so I will be going... forget about the fact that it's Blue Eyes, by the way, who cares? This is just, it's kind of like a dummy to show you the interaction. But I'll go Forbidden Droplet, send 3 cards from my hand or face of field or field to the graveyard, and I'll attempt to negate 3 monsters my opponent controls. Now, what happens if my opponent makes it so that he's going to control less than 3 monsters? Because, he could be doing that. Branded Beast, Tribute to Destroy, and then Hieratic Seal, bounce back a card, and then there's only 2 monsters on the field. So, believe it or not, Forbidden Droplet will not even try to resolve as much as possible. It won't do anything at all, because you sent 3 cards, and the card says... choose that many effect monsters upon controls, and until the end of the turn, blah 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 blah, their attack is halved, also their effects are negated. So in other words, it's not up to the amount of cards that you sent from your hand and or field to the grave, it's choose that many. So because of that, if there's not exactly 3 monsters left on resolution, Forbidden Droplet will simply do nothing at all. And my opponent's negates will keep existing, which is pretty bad. So if you are not aware of that, you might lose, again, some games that you shouldn't be losing, but you can also take that, use that to your advantage, which is always the cool part about these weird plays. But anyways, let's get into the next one. Alrighty, so this one is kind of weird, but it might come up in Silent Enforcer, actually, so you have to also be aware of it. But basically, let's just say that this is irrelevant, but let's just say I go Rescue Rabbit and then summon 2 monsters. My opponent doesn't use the Fire King Sanctuary to XC summon, but then I summon Evilzor Lagia, which has the ability to either negate a spell or trap card, activation, not effect, activation, or when a monster would be normal or special summoned, I can negate that summon. So I can't negate the Sanctuary, obviously, but what if my opponent summons the Garunix Eternity? Can I negate the effect? No, of course not, but can I negate the summon with Evilzor Lagia? And the answer is yes, you actually can negate the summon, even though it was summoned off of a card. It's because the card reads, once per turn, if your opponent special summons a monster or monsters, you can immediately, after this effect resolves, XC summon 1 Fire Xyz monster. So basically what the card does is that it makes you conduct an XC summon. It's just like when you're using Unchained Soul of Rage to link off using your opponent's Tier Elements monsters, you're not summoning like a monster like off of... I mean, you are summoning a monster off of a card effect, but that Tier Elements monster is not being sent to the graveyard because of a card effect, but rather because of a game mechanic, because you're using it as a material for a link summon. This is basically the same. Obviously you're summoning an Xyz monster off of a card, but it's still treated as an inherent summon, and because of that, well, if you really want to be technical with official terms, a built-in summon, but because of that, you can actually negate it with Evilzor Lagia. And what's even crazier is that if you negate and destroy the summon, Garunix has an effect when it's destroyed while it has materials. You can special summon Fire King monsters from your grave equal to the number of materials it had. But since it wasn't even on the field when it was destroyed, it was just in your possession, it's not even gonna know that it has any materials, and because of that, you are not going to be able to special summon anything. Now, if you have something like Eponyx, for example, you can actually special summon Eponyx, because that one is not like Barong, for example, where you have to, one of your face-up Fire King monsters or fire monsters has to be destroyed while face-up on your field. This one is just if your monster that was originally fire is destroyed by battle or by card effect, you can special summon it from your hand. So it's actually really interesting to note that the Garunix will not be able to use this effect to revive back 2 monsters or use the effect to destroy every monster because obviously the summon was negated. Again, this can come up because of Seravis being able to negate summons, which is a card that is played in Silent Enforcer. So that's the reason why I'm saying that, by the way. All of this is going to matter a lot in a few weeks or months or whatever. But yeah, again, the Eponyx will be able to still summon itself. So that's in case you didn't know. Yeah, always interesting to be able to learn these new things. Anyways, let's get into the 4th interaction. Alrighty, so this one is maybe a little more popular because of how controversial and annoying it is, and how much people completely disagree. But it gets also even more complicated than that. Obviously, you already know that everything in Yu-Gi-Oh! Has the potential of being headache-inducing. Anyways, let's just assume that I go normal summon the Eponyx and then use its effect to get the Sanctuary. And then out of nowhere, my opponent goes Flamberge to summon the Masquerena. Then I go, you know what? Okay, you're not using the effect to link off into SP or something? Alright, sure, I'll go triple Tactic Talents to steal. And then my opponent chains the IP to summon the SP. I take control of the SP. What happens now? Can the SP Little Knight trigger on my opponent's, control in order to banish one of my cards? Or can I use the effect of SP because it is now on my field on the resolution, or rather on the summon? Or rather, technically, on the resolution of the summon. Well, no, actually, that makes no sense. And also, can my opponent use the Sunlight Wolf to recycle back a fire monster from the grave? Even though the monster is no longer really there, because the kind of changed location on the resolution. And again, this is extremely confusing as hell, because a lot of those things will, you might never really guess if you don't really know these rulings beforehand. But yeah, basically you can actually use the effect of Sunlight Wolf, or rather your opponent can, in order to recycle back a fire. And also, the player who gets to use the effect of SP is your opponent, actually. So in other words, triple Tactic Talents is kind of dookie here. And what's even crazier is that, yeah, I know, the SP on your field is triggering to banish a card on your own field. What the heck is this? You actually are allowed to use the second effect of SP in order to banish a card on both players' field, which is actually funny. This is the only way in Yu-Gi-Oh! That you can actually trigger SP's second effect, like you can chain its second effect to its first effect. This is the only way, literally, because for SP's second effect to activate, it has to be your opponent that activates a card or effect, not a card on your opponent's field or in your opponent's possession. The card is in your possession, but your opponent is using it on your field. So I think you can understand why people are very frustrated with the way this works. Actually, Triple Tactic Talents is a card that can very easily be annoying, and IP into SP and then stealing it is one of those ways. And there's also like the Chimera Fusion or Branded in Red into Guardian Chimera. This is also really stupid. And again, if you don't know how this works, you're not going to be happy. And again, the Sunlight Wolf also being able to recycle back a fire monster even though the SP isn't even there yet is another one of those weird things. But yeah, now my opponent gets everything, and my talents basically didn't really do much of anything, which is a little sad and pathetic. And my opponent is obviously going plus 10 billion, which is no bueno. Anyways, that's it for this one. Let's get into the final interaction. Alrighty, so ever since Snatch Steel was unbanned, I, funny enough, actually saw a lot of people asking questions about the rulings of Snatch Steel because it's such an old card, and people were not really used to having this card around in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! And I can understand why people would be confused. And I'll be honest with you, I was not really expecting Snatch Steel the way it works, actually, because there are a lot of just rules sometimes in the game that I might not even know, because a lot of them are actually extremely stupid, like the Green Baboon rule. Yeah, that one makes me just want to quit and vomit. Not really, but yeah, kind of. Anyways, Snatch Steel, does it target? Because there's not, you can't really find the word target in its card text. And the answer is every single equipped spell in Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically that has to be equipped to a monster initially has to target. So even though it doesn't specify the word target a monster your opponent controls and then equip it, it still has to target. So in other words, if my opponent has the field spell purely, I can't even attempt to like steal a monster that was summoned that turn because it's untargetable, even though again Snatch Steel doesn't mention that it has to target a monster. Now, what is very confusing about Snatch Steel that might not be a thing with Change of Heart is that, unlike Change of Heart, you actually can take control of Expurely Noir, and the reason for that is because Expurely Noir is only unaffected by activated card effects, not just card effects in general. It's not like Ultimate Falcon. And basically, Snatch Steel, the stealing effect is a continuous effect. As a matter of fact, this is an equipped spell, which functions very similarly to a continuous spell, or like field spells, etc. They all work while they're face up on the field. So yeah, you will be able to steal an Expurely Noir if your opponent doesn't have the reflex of, you know, just spinning it back to the deck. Obviously, this is not going to be relevant because it can easily be taken care of. But if your opponent is always used to being like, okay, yeah, sure, Change of Heart on my Expurely Noir, okay, fine, whatever, who cares, it doesn't do anything, and says the same thing with Snatch Steel, yeah, you can really catch him off guard. Now, that's not a good reason to play Snatch Steel in the first place, because again, it's extremely easy to play around that. You can just spin the card. But yeah, again, if your opponent is unaware of that, or if you are unaware of that, it's a free way to lose in Yu-Gi-Oh! For absolutely zero given reason. Now, there is one more thing that I wanted to cover that is extremely confusing. I've mentioned not too long ago, obviously, that Snatch Steel or equipped spells in general, they all have to target on activation. It's the activation requirement for the card itself, but there is a way to kind of cheat it out and not make it so that it targets, and that would be by using Ohime, the Manifested Mekanko. I think that's the name of the card, the Ritual Monster. It's a weird card because it allows you to immediately equip a monster, like an equipped spell to a monster on the field, and that way, even if a monster is like untargetable, you can kind of still just like cheat out the system and, you know, take control of a monster with Snatch Steel that way. Pretty sure this is how it should work. But anyways, that's it for this video. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Peace.